Spider-Man's one of the few superheroes that's actually had a good run when it comes to video games, and if you've looked at the retro section of our site, you'll know I've looked at some of his previous adventures to hype up the release of this one. But of course, all things come to an end when 2014's Amazing Spider-Man 2 ended up being a bigger train wreck than the One More Day storyline from the comics. Now, it's up to Insomniac to craft a Spider-Man adventure good enough to put him back on the map. It has a lot to live up to though, with Spider-Man 2, Ultimate Spider-Man and my favourite Web of Shadows setting the bar pretty high for an open world Spider-Man title. Does Marvel's Spider-Man live up to those expectations? Let's find out. Insomniac really went all out in the visual department as everything in Marvel's Spider-Man looks incredible. From the facial animations, the detail on Spider-Man's outfit, the reflections of the buildings, everything in between has real visual polish, and New York looks especially incredible whether at night or at day. To see what I mean, just stand on top of a tall building as the draw distance and sheer amount of cars and everything rendered makes everything a lush vista to look at, and there's enough detail on both the ground and in the air to make New York look amazing whether you're swinging through it or just taking a slow stroll through the city streets. When it comes to the story, I just have to say one thing right out the bat. It is not another symbiote storyline. As much as I love Venom, it's great to finally have an original story not centered on any of the symbiotes. Instead, it focuses on an original story where featuring a Peter Parker that has been Spider-Man for a good 8 years now, so he's more experienced, but he's still a bit immature, and it opens with the arrest of Wilson Fisk. And in his absence, Martin Lee's demons roll in and appear to start a gang war with the leftovers of Fisk's crew. But this little gang war just ends up being the small piece of a massive storyline that affects New York on such a huge scale. And it has that classic Spider-Man humour we all know and love, but also isn't afraid to hit with some heavy moments and some plot twists that you may see coming sometimes, but there's other twists that you just will not see coming, and what really took me by surprise. It also manages to have a few appearances and references to many famous Spider-Man and other Marvel characters, and because of how much is here, it's honestly up there with the likes of Kraven's Last Hunt and Spider-Verse as one of my favourite Spider-Man stories. It also helps that we see it from more than just Spider-Man's perspective, as there's playable segments with Mary Jane Watson, and there's also segments where you simply play as Peter Parker as you see him trying to struggle with work, trying to repatch things up with MJ, and of course being a superhero. And it's great when a story tries to incorporate Peter Parker, and it's even better when a game does it well like it does here. Ever since the game was announced at E3, people have been comparing it to Spider-Man 2 because Spider-Man 2 had such a perfect feeling web-swinging mechanic that still holds up today. Thankfully, Marvel's Spider-Man feels fantastic in that regard as well. Webs stick to buildings like they should, and web-swinging feels tight and fun to use thanks to some great physics, and the way you build up speed is simply fun as hell. There's plenty of different movement mechanics to implement, like web zipping, launching from points for extra speed, swan diving to build up speed. It all builds off speed, momentum, and it's just fun. And it feels fantastic to play, and honestly it feels better than Spider-Man 2 did. Even though it's took about 14 years to finally overtake Spider-Man 2 in terms of a good web-slinging mechanic. That fluidity and fun also translates into the combat. Admittedly, it does feel a little bit like the Arkham games, but Insomniac did a great job of putting Spider-Man's abilities into the game to make it feel completely different, while still similar to Arkham. Spider-Man's fast and agile, so you use this to your advantage in combat. You can leap from enemy to enemy, use your webs to close the gap, leap off walls, dodge in mid-air if a guy's about to open fire. There's so much in terms of movement here, and you have the same amount of variety in terms of gadgets. You have different types of webs to use, and they are handy in combat as well, because enemies that are webbed can stick to walls and the floor to be taken out instantly, and those skillful enough can win encounters without throwing a single punch, even though it's far more fun to actually throw a punch. There's also stealth in the game, so you can prowl, use your webs to distract enemies, to isolate them for executions, that kind of thing, and it works really well. There are QTEs in this game, like during certain segments, like in the story, and during certain crimes and combat sequences, but they actually make sense here. They feel right to use, and in terms of cinematic and gameplay blending, they do actually make sense, and that's far better than what the last Spider-Man game that had QuickTime events did.
Help! Please! Someone! I'm going to die!
The combat and movement may be fantastic, but it doesn't really mean much if the city is just nothing but lifeless window dressing. But Insomniac have tried their best to make New York something that actually matters, and in a way it actually feels like a character in its own right, mainly because there's so much to see and do. There's landmarks to take photographs of, there's pigeons to catch for a homeless person named Howard, there's hideouts for the enemy factions that you need to annihilate, there's loads of things to do on top of your usual crime-stopping fanatics. And you're also encouraged to do these missions in a really fun way because you earn tokens, which you can use to buy upgrades for gear, and even unique Spider-Man outfits from Spider-Man's history, and even a few exclusive suits that have been introduced in this game, and each of them have their own unique ability to give you an edge in combat. And copying off Enter Electro on the PS1, you can actually customize the suits to have different abilities from the other costumes, and it's really well done. My only real criticism of the way the city is that the research station missions are a little bit mundane. They kind of feel like it's basically Spider-Man being Captain Planet. He goes around saving the environment, like stopping pollution, that kind of thing, and they just feel a little boring compared to the rest of the game. That and the fact that the crimes that you stop aren't randomly generated. Instead, they're set points on the map. So this is a minor nitpick, but considering I was the kind of person who sunk hours into Spider-Man 2 just stopping random crimes, I kind of wish the crimes were randomly generated, because it means that until the DLCs come out for this game, you will eventually run out of content. I mean, there is a lot here, so it'll take a while, but you will eventually run out, which is a shame. I do have to point out an issue that I had later on in my playthrough where one of my save files ended up being corrupted. I'm not sure what caused it, but I do know that the game would just crash to the home screen every time I loaded this save. Luckily, I'm a bit of a compulsive saver, so I had a backup save and only ended up losing 9 minutes of progress. But it is something to take note of, especially if you don't save often, because that could really screw up a playthrough. Unlike the voiceover for this review, Marvel's Spider-Man has some fantastic audio. The sound effects when you punch someone are really satisfying. There's the hustle and bustle of the traffic and the pedestrians down below to give the city some life. The music is amazing as well. It has that cinematic flair to it, and it gives the musical score, and it just uplifts all of the movie moments to make it feel like you're watching a movie. The voice acting is also pretty solid as well, with Yuri Lowenthal voicing Spider-Man, having reprised his role from 2016 Spider-Man Unlimited on the mobile. It gives that kind of youthfulness to the role, which is what you need from Peter. And other voice actors are just as solid as well, especially J. Jonah Jameson. While he isn't J.K. Simmons,
Are you serious?
he still does a very solid job at voicing the character, and he brings that kind of hatred of Spider-Man with him. After 14 long years, Spider-Man 2 has finally been dethroned as the best Spider-Man game, as Insomniac have crafted an almost perfect Spider-Man title. It has a fantastic story, incredible visuals, and nails how Spider-Man moves and fights with some great mechanics all around. It also helps that it takes place in a version of New York that's full of life and things to do, and all of those things, besides the mundane research station missions, are great to do. It's just a shame that you'll run out of content eventually, because the crimes aren't randomly generated like in Spider-Man 2. And also be sure to save often when you play, just in case you're as unlucky as me and have a corrupted save file later on. Spider-Man 2018 gets 9 out of 10.